Hello you, welcome to another one of these. In this one of these I'm going to be reviewing the Sphero Mini. Going to have a quick look at how it all works, have a look at what it does, and then have a think about actually how could this be used in the classroom or at home to support your child. Little point, when you're going outside to do a product test, do try and make sure you've charged all of your camera batteries beforehand.
It said 4 bars.
So we're going to be looking at Sphero. It's an educational tool. It's a robotic ball, basically. What you're watching currently is a promotional video that the makers of Sphero put out to promote the product, obviously. But it's important that you aren't fooled or misled by the sheen and the glitz and the polish, if you like, of this video, because actually everything you're seeing in this video is really easy to achieve. Sphero does exactly what this video would lead you to think that it does, and actually it does it really well, and it does it quite easily. Now, this maze thing you're looking at, we tried to recreate this with chalk. It didn't go very well, but you know, we did our best. It is what it is. It's just a really good way of getting kids interested in coding, interested in STEM as a much broader subject. It's engaging. It's actually really fun to play around with. There's lots of scope to take it in different directions and being creative with it. So let's take a look. When you take it at its most basic level, you've got a ball and you can use this little touchpad joystick and you can make it roll around. And as a sort of introduction to kind of cause and effect, it's perfect. If you then start venturing into the apps, there are two. Sphero Edu is the one where you do a lot of the coding side of it, and that's the one we're going to look at to begin with. The first thing you need to do is pair it with the device you're going to be using. That's just a matter of holding it to the side of the device and just giving it a few seconds to connect over Bluetooth, and there it is. There are 3 or 4 different ways of controlling it. We're going to look at the block coding because that's the closest thing to Scratch. A lot of primary schools now are using Scratch quite a bit, so this is quite a good way of getting into that, and it works alongside it really neatly. So the program, the most simple program, is a matter of controlling the ball. So the only issue we found initially with this was that the first thing you need to do is orient it, because the problem you have is that when you're using it outside or anywhere that's really bright, there is an LED in the ball. It's very clever. It's very easy to orient it using that LED, and each of the different apps and each of the different screens you might use have an area where you can quickly go in and orient it. You can't see it in broad daylight, so we couldn't really orient it. We did experiment with holding it in our hands and trying to see it, but of course that's no good once you put it back down on the ground again. Once you've oriented it, it's then just a little bit of trial and error, actually deciding, right, I want it to go at this angle for this amount of distance at this speed. So in each of these tests we were basically trying to change the angle very slightly each time to try and get it to go down this little path that we'd drawn in pink chalk. That became more difficult because obviously every time we put the ball down it wasn't necessarily orienting the way we wanted it to. However, we did finally nail it, or near enough nail it, on about the 11th or 12th attempt. Ish.
Spot on.
So we did eventually manage to get it to go down the path, sort of. Let's have a look and see what that code would translate to if we were to be doing it in Scratch. Okay, so this is Scratch. That's the name of the cat, if you were curious. I will do some tutorials on Scratch at some future point, but for now, let's hustle through this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say that when the flag is clicked, which is that flag there, we're going to center the cat at the middle of the screen, which is why the x-axis, which is left to right, and the y-axis, top to bottom, are both set to 0. It's the middle of the screen. I'm also going to change the costume for our sprite, the character that we're going to be moving around. I'm going to change that to a Sphero ball just because, you know, I can. Now you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm recentering where the actual centre of the sprite is. Recorded this about 4 times before I realised I needed to do that, so that's why I haven't done it. So it just means that the character centres to the middle of the screen, like the cat did. So that's what the 2 zeros indicate. And I've tweaked the y-axis ever so slightly so it goes to the top of the screen, which is what's happened there. Now this is very similar then to the code on the Sphero. We're going to point the sprite in a particular direction, which is kind of the equivalent of making it rotate and face a different way, and then we're going to move it forwards. I'm adding wait commands so that there will be a little pause between certain things, just so you can see it happen. Otherwise it'll happen like that and then you've kind of wondered what happened. Now, in order to change the speed for the sprite, we need to create a variable, because Scratch doesn't come with things like that built in. You have to create them yourself. So we've created a variable called speed, and we're going to set the value of that to 10, arbitrary number, to be honest. Again, we'll talk about variables and stuff in another video. Moving 10 steps, equivalent again to what we did with the Sphero itself. And we're going to, well, as you can see, what I'm basically doing is I'm adding a number of these together, and then it should just move. Now it moved those 30 steps, the 3 lots of 10, in one go. And obviously you didn't see there was any gap in between those. So I'm going to add another wait command after each of these. Only a short one, just long enough, I suppose, that you can actually see something happens. It's the easiest way of doing more than one thing, I find. So there we go. So now you can see those little staggers as it moves 10 steps, 10 steps, 10 steps. And then we can kind of add multiples of these. Don't do this. This is annoying. Luckily there's an undelete. The number of times I've done this. So there we go. So then we have 40 or 50 or 60 or something steps, and then we can see him move little staggered movements down the screen, little increments of 10. Now obviously there's an easier way of doing all of this, and again we're going to cover a lot of this stuff in a future lesson. Future video. I suppose it is a sort of lesson. We're going to do a loop. So we're going to repeat the 10 steps, wait 0.5 seconds, and we're going to repeat that 10 times, which makes our code much more refined. And there we have it. And so really what this code is doing is very similar to what we had on the Sphero. Conceptually it's very similar. In terms of what the blocks do, it's very similar. The only real difference on the Sphero is that you get all of these things, direction, speed and distance, in one block, because obviously, you know, the coding for that is designed around a ball moving. So it makes sense that that process is a lot easier to code than perhaps it would be in Scratch. So here we have it. We move 100 steps, 10 lots of 10, a pause after each one, and then it changes direction to the right, and then we basically repeat the process. So let's have a recap on the code that we've written. So we set the position on the screen for its starting point, we determine the direction it's going to face in, we have a little pause, we then change the direction it's going to face to head downwards. We're going to set the speed to 10, although if I'm being brutally honest, the speed doesn't seem to really make much of a difference. Wouldn't let me type there, that's it. So if we change it to 50 and we run it again, you'll notice that the one where it moves at 50 speed, and then the one where it moves at 10 speed, which is now, are the same. There's no difference there. We'll look at that another time, I think. For now, let's just bin that and bin that. Okay, so that's much easier to read. Let's increase the number of steps to 20. Actually, let's up this one to, yeah, okay, and then let's run it and then we'll see. So it moves at 10 speed, or 10 steps increments, and then it moves at 20 step increments, and obviously it's moving quicker because it's moving further each time, so it has the illusion of moving more quickly. As I say, we'll look at speed another time. So let's have a look at another way of manipulating the Sphero, and also how to actually orient it in space. So if we go into there, We can choose from one of 3 program types: draw, blocks or text. We're going to go for draw. It already knows which Sphero model we're using. That's your draw canvas. If we go into the aim option, we get this circle with a little blue blob. Now the blue blob relates to this blue LED inside the ball itself, and as we move that around on this big circle, that will then make the Sphero ball itself reorient. So let's have a look at this canvas. Now, it's important to note that the longer the marks are that you make, the further it will travel. Let's assume that the circumference of this, the surface area of this grid, is roughly the equivalent of the Earth, as I discovered when I tried to maneuver it around my office. So drawing a line like this big, will make it travel quite a long distance. So let's aim for something a little bit smaller. Let's aim for something even smaller than that. Let's go about that big. Looks pretty good. Okay, so there are 2 apps, the second of which, we've looked at Sphero Edu, the second of which is Sphero Mini, which we'll go into now. So we need to connect our little Sphero. He's currently charging, so we'll see if it can detect him from where it is. Yay, there we go. Down the bottom left, there's a little plus icon, and that brings up a whole menu of other options. Face drive and screen drive are probably the 2 biggest novelties, I would say, in this selection. They're the ones that my son seems to enjoy the most. Face drive literally allows you to control the Sphero with your face. So let's go back into the menu and have a look at screen drive. So touch and drag to steer, make noise to accelerate. Okay. Even as early on as Key Stage 1, children are required as part of their computing curriculum to understand algorithms and to create and debug simple programs. By Key Stage 2, they should also be using things like sequencing and selection and repetition in programs, so like we've talked about loops briefly in this video, and they should also be explaining algorithms and debugging programs using logical reasoning. Algorithms go hand in hand with the simple programs, making the Sphero move left and right or change colour. Those are all algorithms, those are all simple programs, and finding out why those programs didn't behave the way you expected them to or have the results you expected is your debugging. And your logical reasoning is simply being able to look at that code and deduce what you think will happen in that program when it's run based on the commands that you can see written down. If it says to move forwards and you extrapolate that means it's going to go backwards, you aren't using logical reasoning. The Sphero website contains a huge number of resources split up by subject, by age group. There are resources that are being created by the people who make Sphero. There are resources that are being created by the Sphero community, which means teachers that have been using it can provide resources that show you how to use it in the classroom. This one, for example, can be used in conjunction with the Hour of Code. It has a starter activity where you get to explore how the Sphero actually works and discuss it with a partner. It has a sort of a first activity where you get to watch a video that sort of teaches you a bit about Sphero and about the app and about how they both work. You have an activity where you can work individually or with a pair or in a group where you try and program the Sphero to draw a square or whatever shape you decide. There's an extension task, or just a next level where you get to try and use loops to simplify that program. There's another extension task where you get to play around with lights and sound. There are other challenges. There's plenary activities and discussion points. There's even tutorial videos. So here's the big question then. Do you actually need something like this to teach these things in the classroom? It's all very good being able to say, oh, it does this and it does that and it's really easy and there's resources and stuff, but ultimately, real world, do you need it? And the answer, I guess, is no. Actually, honestly, you don't need it. I've taught the idea of algorithms and sort of computational thinking using a dictionary, just a single dictionary, one volunteer at the front of the room, and a dictionary. You know, you can teach algorithms in the sense of moving, like go forwards, turn left, turn right, using the students. Just get a student up, take the bin, empty it out, maybe, slap it over the head. Probably don't do any of that, but you could easily, you know, blindfold them or something and get a friend of theirs to write down the instructions to navigate around the room. But how much more motivating and exciting is something like this? This sort of thing didn't exist when I was at school because technology was
one big pile of shit.
We had one computer in the whole of my school, and I used it once in the 4 or 5 years that I was there. Now, admittedly, it was a BBC Micro, so I probably got off lightly, but nevertheless, the point is that we live in a world now where technology and stuff like this is kind of normal. We need to get kids interested and passionate about computer science. STEM generally, but computer science is kind of what we're talking about. Ultimately, do you need any of the resources that you use in school? You could just stand at the front of the room and talk at the students and get them to write copious notes. That would probably work, maybe, but what a miserable, dull existence it would be, both to be a teacher and a student. Things like this make computing as a subject kind of exciting. I did a whole unit, so like 2-3 months of work on microbits, and every week in the builder, once the word had spread a little bit that we're going to be using microbits, and I got one out and I kind of showed them a little bit of what it could do. I think I had it scrolling text, and I showed it to them a few weeks before we started that unit just to kind of zhuzh them up a bit. Every lesson they'd pass me in the corridor and say, "Oh, sir, we're using microbits this week." And I'd be like, "No! You know, for the love of God, it's my lunch break. Please leave me alone. Please stop ringing me at home. I don't know when we're going to use them." That didn't happen. But all the rest of it did. Because, you know, there was a buzz. It's exciting. These sorts of things make the subject exciting, make it interesting, make it that people want to come to the lesson. They want to see what else they can do. You know, you tell them we're going to be learning about algorithms, they just shut off. Tell them we're going to be using algorithms, and by using algorithms we're going to take this robotic ball and navigate it around an assault course of your own design. All of a sudden, they're switched on. Any teacher that has things like this at their fingertips, that is able to tap into stuff like this, and any of these sorts of things, is going to be creating an environment where kids want to come, and they want to learn. They want to, yeah, you could argue it's a toy. A friend of mine continually ribs me about the fact that I keep getting these toys, and I keep pointing out they're educational tools. They're not toys. Of course they're toys, but they're also educational tools. Kids want to play with stuff like this, and if you can get them interested and excited about using these things, they'll start to understand that actually it's a really exciting subject generally. Be able to create something from nothing, being able to write a program that does all these various things, that's exciting. And things like this kind of help switch the kids on to stuff like that. I cannot recommend Sphero highly enough. It's everything you want it to be. It's small and it's easy to charge and to switch on and to connect. I haven't lost the connection to this at all. I mean, my phone's in another room at the moment. This thing's still on, it's still paired. The software, the apps for it are really good. They're really fluid, they're really easy to understand. You don't have to spend half an hour trying to figure out what everything does or where things are. They're laid out nicely, everything's simple. The fact that I said it ties in with Scratch, if they've already done Scratch or they're going to be using Scratch, this is a perfect way in, or a perfect extension from what they've already done. They come in different colours as well. For me, this does everything you need in order to be able to properly and engagingly, is that a word? Teach computer science at Key Stages 1 and 2. Yeah, it's arguably a bit of a novelty, it's a fun item, but, you know, to think about the potential. This is just one subject. You could easily use this in art, cover it in paint, you can draw with it. Put a toilet roll tube. Well, I'm looking around my office for a toilet roll tube. Put a toilet roll tube on it and like draw a face or something, I don't know, and you've got like a little robot thing. I mean, obviously make it better than that. I love it. I really love it. I'm scared of breaking it a lot of the time. You've got a lot of stuff there already that you can tap into. You don't have to worry about planning necessarily. Planning lessons and stuff, certainly not the bare bones of a series of lessons, because that stuff's there for you. You know, obviously you need to go in and look at your class and the students that you've got in your class and all the other things and tweak it, but the bare bones is right there for you. I can't recommend Sphero highly enough. It's a blast, and I defy any teacher that gets a Sphero or a number of Spheros to use in the classroom. I defy any of you not to take one home with you to play with it, to experiment, just to see if it's going to be good for the lessons.
Well, this is how many batteries we've managed to get through. All of them dead, apart from this one, which had about 5 minutes in it.